All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating puzzle, one that sits right at the heart of how we try to understand the world through economics. It's a paradox that all comes down to one single mind-bending question. So think about that for a second. How can a tool, a model that we know for a fact is built on things that aren't real, somehow spit out a true explanation for how the real world works? It sounds completely impossible, right? Well, that's the mystery we're going to investigate today. The core of this whole problem is what philosophers call a paradox. It's basically a set of statements that, on their own, seem totally fine, totally reasonable. But when you put them all together, they create a logical train wreck. They just can't all be true at the same time. Okay, so here are the three pieces of our impossible puzzle. First, economic models are false. I mean, they're packed with simplifications and assumptions we know aren't literally true. Second, economists use these exact models to explain what's happening in the world, and honestly, they feel like they explain things. And third, for an explanation to actually be, a good one, it kind of has to be true, right? You can't explain why your lemon tree is sick by claiming its pot is full of water when it's actually bone dry. Each step seems solid on its own, but together, well, that's our contradiction. So to really see this paradox in action, we need a prime example. Let's take a look at a classic model from an economist named Harold Hodaling, all the way back in 1929. Let's call this Exhibit A in our investigation. The setup is just beautiful in its simplicity. I want you to picture a long, straight beach, basically just a line. And all along this line, you have potential customers, just perfectly evenly spaced out. And every single one of them wants an ice cream. Okay, now, two ice cream vendors show up to sell on this beach. Their one and only goal is to make as much money as possible by getting the biggest chunk of the market they can. They can put their carts anywhere they want. So where do they go? Now, you might think, logically, they'd spread out to serve everyone best, right? Like one at the 25% mark and the other at the 75% mark. But the model shows that's not a stable situation. See, one vendor would realize they could inch a little closer to the middle and steal a few of the other guy's customers. Then the other vendor would do the same thing. And the inevitable result of this little shuffle? They end up right next to each other, back to back, smack dab in the center of the beach. And this is where the paradox really hits you. This simple, obviously fake model of a beach suddenly gives us this powerful explanation for something real and incredibly complex. Hodaling himself made the connection you see right here. I mean, why do the major political parties sometimes sound so similar? Why do you see three gas stations all on the same corner? The model says it's this principle of minimal differentiation at play. It really feels like a genuine explanation. So if the model works so well at explaining things, then maybe our first premise is the one that's wrong. Maybe, in some weird way, the model is actually true. Let's put this idea in the interrogation room. This is suspect number one. So the argument goes something like this. The model is like a clean room experiment in physics. Scientists create a vacuum to study gravity without annoying things like air resistance getting in the way. So maybe economists are just creating a model vacuum to study competition without all the messy, complicated details of real life. By isolating that one key cause, the model shows us a fundamental truth. But there's a huge difference here. A physics model, what they call a Galilean idealization, works by removing things, like air resistance, to isolate one cause. Economic models, on the other hand, they work by adding specific, made-up conditions. Hodaling didn't just remove messy geography. He constructed a perfect, one-dimensional line and customers who all have perfectly linear travel costs. And that right there is the fatal flaw for suspect number one. The model's conclusion isn't some deep truth it has uncovered. The conclusion is completely dependent on those specific fictions. For example, if you just tweak one assumption, say travel costs aren't linear, they're quadratic, meaning walking farther gets exponentially more annoying, the model suddenly predicts the exact opposite outcome. The vendors will spread out as far as possible. So the alibi that the model is somehow true in the abstract, it just falls apart. Okay, so if the model isn't true, maybe it's not actually explaining anything. Let's bring in our second suspect, the claim that these models are explanatory in the first place. Maybe that's the premise we should throw out. So the defense for this suspect is something like this. Maybe we're taking these models too seriously. They aren't meant to explain reality at all. They're just useful tools, little mental gyms that help economists think through possibilities, or maybe frameworks that just help generate ideas that you have to go test somewhere else. But this argument hits a major snag. Economists themselves talk as if their models are absolutely giving us explanations. Just look at George Akerlof. When he's writing about his famous market for lemons model, he's not saying, hey, here's a fun thought experiment. No, he's explicitly saying, we offer a different explanation for a real-world thing. So, you see the problem. To say that models don't explain is to pretty much ignore the entire way economics is practiced. People from Hodling back in 1929 to Akerlof in 1970 and countless economists today, they clearly believe and they clearly state that their models are explaining things. Suspect number two's alibi just collapses under the weight of the evidence. Well, this leaves us with our third, and by far our most radical suspect. We've established the models are false. We've established they are used to explain. The only thing left to attack is that third premise, that explanations require truth. What if, for an explanation to be a good one, it doesn't actually have to be true? This wild idea comes from a branch of philosophy called unificationism. And it says an explanation is powerful not because it's a perfect photo of reality, but because it saves us a ton of brain power. It takes one simple, repeatable pattern of argument and shows how you can use it to explain a whole bunch of different things that seemed disconnected before. And at first blush, this looks like our answer. It makes total sense of why economists seem to love using the same basic toolkit. Rational actors, maximizing profits, finding equilibrium, over and over again. Maybe the power isn't in how true any single model is, but in the unifying power of the whole approach. But there's a catch, a big one. Think about a truly unifying theory, like Newton's laws of motion. The term force in that theory has a very specific, very restrictive meaning. For unification to really be explanatory, the rules have to be strict like that. But in economics, not so much. A term like utility can mean almost anything. Money, votes, happiness, reputation. The rules are so flexible that the unification just feels fake. It's less like a powerful scientific theory and more like a super flexible language that can be twisted to fit anything. So where does that leave our investigation? We've interrogated all three of our suspects, and honestly, every single one of them has slipped through our fingers. Let's just quickly recap the case file. So we've confirmed it. Economic models are in fact false. Their conclusions depend on their fictions. We've also confirmed that, yes, they are absolutely used as explanations by the people who make them. And we've confirmed that our deepest gut feeling is that a real explanation has to involve truth. We are right back where we started, stuck with an unsolved paradox. And what's amazing is that this isn't just me saying this. The source material this whole explainer is based on concludes with pretty much this exact sentiment. So this isn't a failure of our investigation. It's the discovery that we've hit a genuine frontier of knowledge. This puzzle of how false models can actually explain things is a deep, unresolved question in the philosophy of science. And that leaves us with one final, really profound question to chew on. If some of our most powerful tools for making sense of the world are built on a foundation of things we know aren't true, what does that say about what it even means to understand something? That's the paradox of economic models. Thanks for exploring it with me.